Joining us right now is Freedom Caucus member, Congressman Ron DeSantis. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Can you give us a status check first and foremost? Is there a new bill underway, and how close are you?
Well, I'm not exactly sure. I can tell you that the White House and particularly the Vice President have done a really good job of bringing to the table new ideas that can get us into a place where we're going to have a product that's ready for prime time, and I think most importantly that will put a downward pressure on insurance premiums. I think the original bill wouldn't have done that, and so I think the White House is keenly aware. So I've had a lot of good ideas brought forward that I could be comfortable with. I don't think there's a final product yet, but I definitely think there's a way forward.
But I guess, Congressman, what I'm asking you is, I mean, when the president said earlier this week to me in that interview, we've got to do health care first, we're still negotiating in order to get to tax reform, that was a surprise to people because people weren't clear in terms of that you guys are still in it the way you are. We thought that you were, you know, that the Congress and the president were turning the attention to tax reform, but in fact you're not until health care is done. So take us through the process. What has changed in the last 2 weeks since that GOP bill failed?
Well, I think, Maria, the failure of the bill was based on an artificial deadline, and there was a deadline set. You must pass this bill by this date. There was no reason why we had to do that, and we hadn't built consensus within our conference, and so you didn't have a consensus on March 23rd. But I think most people who looked at that bill, who are on the conservative side or health care experts, have said, look, you guys got to fix it, do it right. Don't go fast. Do it. Take your time and get it right. And so the American people ultimately aren't going to care whether the bill passed on March 23rd or April 23rd. I think what they're going to care about is, are they going to see improvements in health care?
Right.
And I think we're moving in that direction. And so I think people understood once that bill wasn't able to go that we can't just walk away from it because we've been promising this for so many years. So you got to get down and you got to end up getting a deal. So I think that there's definitely a pathway for it, but I definitely think we can't quit.
Well, Congressman, people did expect you to get something done immediately. Quite frankly, you've had 7 years to come up with a plan, first and foremost, and the insurance companies are already putting together and pricing their plans for 2018. Those will be presented in June and July to the insurance regulators at the state level. So there is urgency, and I didn't even throw in the 2017 you're working under, but the reconciliation rules for the 2017 fiscal year.
Right, but the difference between March 23rd and April 23rd with reconciliation is not significant. The Senate wasn't even going to take this bill up till May anyways. So I think we could have ironed things out rather than set that deadline. But I think it's important to point out, you say we've had time to come up with a plan. I think there's actually pretty broad acceptance of the replacement elements in the plan. Not that they're all perfect, but I think a lot of members are fine with that. I think where the disagreement has been is on the repeal part of it. You know, are we going to actually repeal core elements of Obamacare? The initial bill left a lot of Obamacare intact, and I think what more limited government conservatives are trying to do is say, can we pare back some of the other onerous parts of Obamacare so that we can actually let market forces flourish? So the replace element, I think, is actually probably there. I think it's more on, we got to come to grips on repeal and follow through with that part of it.
So just to be clear, because the caucus chairman, Mark Meadows, said that he's confident Republicans will pass the bill. And a lot of people feel that tax reform is hostage to health care. So just to be clear, you believe that you think you can get a deal this year, in the next couple of weeks? Because Meadows said that the House may cut its recess short and go back to Washington to vote on the legislation. That is according to USA Today. Are your colleagues cutting their trip short?
Well, I would support that if we have the consensus, for sure. And so I think that we're looking at a relatively short horizon, maybe more than a week or two. But I think by the time we get to mid-May, we're going to have had to send this thing to the Senate. So I'm optimistic that we can do it. And yes, it does help with tax reform, and tax reform is very important, and I certainly want to do that big time. But we still got to recognize that you got to get the health reform right. I mean, if you don't get it right, and then a year from now people are saying, man, my premiums are going up, and you say, I know, but we had to do that for tax reform. I think a lot of them are going to say, well, no, you should have gotten it right. So I think we're in the process of trying to get it right right now.
That's a great point.
Congressman, it's Matt Murray. When the bill went down a couple weeks ago, the president pretty explicitly blamed the Freedom Caucus and put a lot of pressure on that group and said they were the stalwarts. And you're talking about repeal. We know there's been differences on, for instance, the pre-existing condition mandate. But are you suggesting that there's places also where the Freedom Caucus might compromise to keep moderates on board? Because the problem is the divide within the GOP was pretty severe. So can you tell us more about where is the Freedom Caucus, are you just seeing things move in that direction, or is the Freedom Caucus changing your stance on some things?
Well, I think if you remember the initial debate, the bill was unveiled in early March and said, okay, we're going to pass it in a couple weeks, take it or leave it. There was initially no interest in amending the bill. Finally, towards the end, there was kind of some helter-skelter movement to change parts of the bill. So I've been open to a variety of approaches. I mean, you know, my constituents say you guys should just repeal it outright. As you mentioned, there's moderates who may not be supportive of that. So there's other things that the vice president has put forward, some folks in the White House about letting states apply for waivers, maybe let states set up free market alternatives to Obamacare that I think may not go quite as far as I want, but I think would be something that we could at least go to our constituents and say we're delivering some benefits to them in terms of lower costs.
Congressman, the Freedom Caucus cared a lot about the premiums, but the moderate conservatives, as well as a lot of the GOP governors, cared about Medicaid expansion. Ohio, Michigan, Nevada, okay, and on the Senate side, Murkowski, Collins, Portman, and you can go on. So how are you squaring the circle on the Medicaid expansion? Because that's where the congressperson in Virginia, the congressperson in New Jersey, that's where the moderates kind of fled the day of the vote. So how do you square that circle?
Well, no, actually, I think that's kind of would be some way where you could compromise to say, okay, you have conservatives that are really interested in injecting market forces into the health insurance system. We don't like the Obamacare mandates. We think we can do that a better way, but we also recognize their Medicaid concerns, and so that would be something, even though Florida didn't expand Medicaid, and I think that there's been problems with doing that, you know, maybe you give a little bit there so that some moderates will have a better off-ramp with that in exchange for moving in a more market direction on the private insurance market. So there, you definitely could do that, and that would be something I would certainly be open to.
This is a question from a viewer. Why are you guys on a 2-week spring break? If this is not getting done, if this is so critical to the American people, if tax reform and tax cuts, that health care reform, repeal and replace, you name it, infrastructure spending, why are you on a 2-week break? Why didn't y'all stay and work?
Well, I was supportive of canceling the recess and just staying, hammering it out, getting it done, and then bringing it to the floor. And I think we should have done that. Now, I mean, I'm not on a vacation. I'm here working my district. I'm going to go right after this. I have an event, and we've been moving around. So we do work when we're down here, but I think you're right. This bill needs to get done. We had made some progress over the last week and a half. And while you still have people negotiating, it's just a little bit different when people kind of go back home, and it's harder to keep in touch with people. So I think we probably should have stayed, and I was supportive of that.